My name's Graham Nichols.
I am Mark Bentham.
And I'm Katie Holloway. You are listening to Ordinary. Those who are watching on YouTube must always think, why are they always giggling when they say their names? Listeners, you will not believe how many times it often takes us to get saying our names correct. And this professional...
It's not getting our names correct. We know our names, Katie. You're making us sound like we don't remember our names. I mean, you know, but it's more the order that we say it in. And you like a particular order. And,
are you sure I remember my name?
Well, I didn't want to single you out.
I have it on a prompt up here just in case I forget.
I feel like after this session, really, Katie should have introduced you as, you know, author, editor, conference speaker on the subject that we're talking about.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh,
you know.
Me. Oh,
you.
Oh,
I like the way you played that down. I like the way you played that down.
Me?
What, me? No, possibly me. No, you can't be talking about me.
Yeah. Now you mention it, if you guys have got something else to do, I'll just take over.
Well, you might as well just sit here. I'll just sit here like this, holding up your book that you ordered, Chad.
Yeah.
Look, can you see? It's got his name right at the top.
Yeah.
Must be a good read. Mark's put lots of Post-it notes in that.
Yeah, there's lots of helpful...
he's got a lot of things he's got problems with.
To be fair, Mark does that with lots of books, so I'm not sure that elevates it above others.
What can I say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
good.
fine. I've not actually read that book, Graham. Tell us what it's about. I'd forgotten that you wrote that.
Well, that's just as well, because you prepared without that in mind.
I did, yeah.
I wrote it because I was concerned that people were veering off in two directions. One of saying abuse of power by leaders never happens, and it's just kind of good leaders being disrespected, or the other extreme of saying everyone's a victim, it's all a disaster, any power is bad. So it was trying to say here's a biblical way in the middle. Whether it's the perfect middle, I have no idea, but that was the motivation to say it's going wrong in different directions. This is a biblical idea. So
yeah, cool.
It's just one contribution amongst many others to the topic, and lots of other wisdom, which I'm sure Mark and you have too.
Well, but the helpful thing is in fairness, it's probably one of the few that's done in a UK context.
Yeah.
Lots of the stuff coming out is US based. There is another one, Powerful Leaders by Marcus Honeysett, which is UK. But other than that, there aren't many who are thinking about it from a UK perspective, which is just slightly different.
Yeah. For those who are audio only, tell us what the book's called, Graham.
It's called Challenging Leaders, published by Christian Focused Publications.
Available in all good bookshops.
It is actually.
Probably some bad ones as well.
They're really good at getting it out in the kind of network. So, you know, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Eden Books, you can get it on ICM Books, you can get it on the Evangelical Bookshop in Northern Ireland. They're really good. They just whack it out everywhere and get people buying stock.
But guess who doesn't have a copy, Katie?
I don't have a copy at the moment.
Graham doesn't have a copy. There we go.
Can't ask to borrow it then.
No.
We've done a few little mini conferences, and people just want... we haven't had enough, so I've had to give away all of my copies, basically.
There you go.
Oh, okay, I'm a tiny violin
speaker,
for you. Yeah.
Author and editor Graham Nichols live with us today, talking about leadership.
When's my fame and fortune coming from this podcast? Is that to come?
Probably the same time.
Something relevant.
3 seasons down the line.
Hey, I'm on this for 5 seasons. I've still got nowhere. So what does that mean?
Neither fame nor fortune.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Katie?
Yeah. So, I've headed it up like leaders' failings, but as we go, maybe we'll think of a more interesting title. Or
maybe something like challenging leaders.
Maybe we should call it that. Yeah.
Or powerful leaders.
That's probably plagiarism.
Pastoral malpractice.
Yeah, that would be a good one, but sounds scary. But I mean, it kind of is a scary issue to delve into, and it's something that I thought we should discuss, but I didn't really know how to. I don't feel like I'm an expert on it. It's just that there just seems to be more and more church leaders who are publicly being asked to step down or choosing to step down, or just having their name kind of dragged through mud, whether it's real mud or not real mud, all over, the new
Is anyone really literally dragged through real mud?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, both senses are metaphorical. You've thrown me off my stride now.
You're welcome. Yeah. That's what I do.
I can tell you two have been at a staff meeting today. Quite a different vibe.
All spiky.
Yeah, spiky.
Spiky and sparky.
All of those things. Is it that we are we are seeing more of this? Do you think that more leaders are just failing in significant ways? Or is it just that we're hearing about it more because we're all on social media, all that kind of stuff?
It's really hard to say whether it's actually happening more. I think it's got a higher profile, and there are all kinds of reasons to do with social media and communications that means that's so. But I also think there's been about 20 years of a kind of a growing body of work talking about abuse in a context of spiritual settings, which has made it more of a thing that you would name and sort of look out for. So although I don't think it's at all a new thing, I think you can go back in the Old Testament and work your way through and say this is completely a biblical category. In terms of the framing of it and the contested terminology like spiritual abuse, in terms of the framing of it, that's relatively new. Like I think when Mark and I were kind of starting out working together, the term spiritual abuse wasn't being used, whereas now it would be used. I don't think that's because suddenly there's been loads more of it happening, but I think the terminology is there, which has maybe flushed out a few examples. But I think people have abused power since people have been in existence, since the fall. But I think the framing of it is new, which is perhaps why it's been exposed in a particular way. And people's willingness in churches to call it out has probably changed. Maybe there is an over-eagerness, but certainly there's more of a willingness, which could be a good thing.
And possibly just a more of a willingness to open up generally about, actually, I'm a victim of this thing or that thing or this thing, like across the board. So
I know you asked the questions, Katie, but just to ask one of Mark, an Oak Hill question. Were they teaching that when you were studying in the late noughties kind of thing? As in, were they saying, oh, this whole area of leadership and power? And because I'm sure that would get a kind of a module now of some sort.
No, they weren't. They weren't.
It wasn't even a thing.
But we were being taught what it was to be a pastor.
Yeah.
And to be a pastor, it's still the same in many ways today. It's leadership, it's shepherding, it's gentle. It's never seeking to be manipulative. It's not seeking to use one's position for one's own power and gain. So that's always been the mark of what it is to be a leader. As you alluded to, Graham, Old Testament, Ezekiel 34 is all about leaders who abuse their power and fail to care for God's sheep. And it's always been an issue. Probably it's been a good thing in the sense of it's been highlighted. Not probably, it is a good thing that it's been highlighted. But I think within that, because we're still early days in what this is and what this isn't, there's probably been some where it's probably not, and some where it's so obviously it is and should have been called out much before.
Yeah. So I'm not really in the know about any particular cases of this. It's not something I've really studied, but it's probably for the best because it's not really helpful, I don't think, to dwell on particular cases or names or any of that. But do you think that there are more genuine sin issues that need dealing with leaders across the board? Or is it that, is it that like standards for leaders are getting higher? So we're saying, actually, you can't do it now because of this thing, which previously we wouldn't have held as such a high thing. Is it a bit of both? What do you think?
I think the categories of abuse of power have changed a bit. Mark's absolutely right that it's not a new thing at all, and we could just teach the positives. But I most of my existence as an adult Christian has known some disappointments from leaders who have failed. Probably it's only the last 10 years where the failure has been categorized not necessarily as some kind of physical abuse or some kind of immorality or financial abuse. It's been in this new category of abusing abusing power, abusing the position of power, which not new, but probably more identified. And it's really hard to say more than that, really, as to whether there's a poorer quality of leaders, whether there's spiritual decline and we're all more worldly and more prone to it, or whether it's more highlighted in this particular generation. I'm not sure it's possible. You've got to kind of deal with what's in front of you, though, really, and say, this happens. When it happens, this is how we need to deal with it. And more importantly, this is how we need to try and stop it. I would say that often abuse of power in general, not always, but sometimes leads to abuse in other ways. So you might say, well, there's someone who's abusing their power and it's unkind, but it's not illegal and it's not immoral. But often the abuse of power that's not unkind or immoral or illegal often leads to something that is immoral, illegal, or abusive in some way, physically abusive, emotionally. But it often leads on to other things, because once you become intoxicated with power, you kind of think, well, you're going to get away with financial impropriety or relational impropriety and so on. So it does seem to often lead on to those things. That has been the case in some of the high-profile cases as well. Some of them, not all.
Yeah. So when we talk about this term spiritual abuse, what kinds of things is that? Because it's, obviously physical abuse, sexual, financial, all these things are horrible, but quite easily definable. I'm not sure if I would know how to recognise if somebody was spiritually abusing. So what do we mean when we talk about that?
Well, let Graham define that, since he's written a book on this very issue.
Yeah. To be fair, it's a pretty slippery thing, and it is a contested term in that some people don't like it and would rather use different terms. But it's around the area of using your power not to spiritually enhance, build up, encourage, help to grow, point them to Christ, nurture, feed, lead, protect, provide. So not using any spiritual authority to do those good things, but using it to control, manipulate, include and exclude at will, direct them kind of under your power rather than under the power of Christ, get their allegiance to you rather than to Christ, and to make them feel that while they're on the in crowd, that's fine, but if they kind of move out of your orbit of approval, then they're a sort of second class citizen, and they're really out of the group, sort of thing. So yeah, it's
sounds like a cult
kind of things, yeah.
But I guess it must play down at less extreme versions and that as well. Yeah,
and I think part of the problem is that it's not just a classic celebrity church that might do that, where you've got sort of a very, very charismatic, in the sort of sense of character, not
with a small c.
Yeah, a very charismatic leader, of a mega church. It's not just that, because in evangelical circles we value preaching and powerful preaching and faithful preaching. Sometimes, a fairly average evangelical preacher can be looked up to in a way that's unhelpful. Even though they may not be extraordinarily charismatic, they might often be a very strong character and someone who people would rightly look up to, but that becomes distorted. If you want to add anything to that, Mark.
Well, it's not just in the character. I think where legalism is really at play.
Yeah.
So so therefore the pastor, the leader, what they decree becomes the norm.
Yeah.
So and sometimes this is where it gets really complicated, because pastors are to lead, so you lead out in an area, but it becomes, therefore you must do it my way or the highway kind of. That's where it becomes the unhelpful. And I imagine probably all pastors at points in our zeal to encourage someone have kind of been too kind of pushy, possibly. And of course, where then again, so it's not that you've done that with a spiteful heart or because you want the best for someone. But I think where it then crosses the line is where it becomes that's your normal pattern. And someone said, "Oh, your response isn't, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't quite realise. I was just, do you know what I mean?" So that's where it's a spectrum of a line where it becomes hard. It becomes the norm that unless you do it this way, then you're just it stops recognizing the difference between us, and it becomes much more about this way or no other way. It becomes more about law than becomes grace. It seems to me, becomes much more about this sense of, and it's often characterized discipleship. You're being discipled by this person. You feel special because they have invested in you. And I think it is something that all pastors probably have to guard their hearts against, because just in zeal and in kind of the sense of wanting to disciple people well, and you have those who you make connections with, and it's not hard to begin to see how that then become unhelpful or unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I think part of what's happened is education over the last 10 years on this issue, that just some really helpful thoughts on it, and tragically through some very horrible cases has brought to light what is happening, which is then making people more aware of it and challenging people on it. That makes sense. Graham's looking confused by it all.
Me?
Yeah, you're looking very like...
no, I'm with it.
It's concentrating.
I'm agreeing with it all. I was holding something in my head ready to say at some point. It takes a lot of concentration.
Is it just churches where we see this? Is it just Christianity, or is this cropping up in other religions or with other kinds of spiritual leaders?
Yeah, that's another really tricky one, because there is a whole culture of questioning authority right across all kinds of different disciplines, whether they're religious or charitable groups or politicians or teachers, doctors, all those things. So there's a whole kind of, are any of these people misusing their power? So I think because misuse of power is a sinful tendency that we all have, because we're self-centered and we want to be on the throne. I think anyone in any leadership position is prone to this. So it's not confined to Christian circles. I think where it's so tragic in the church is because it's the place where you would expect to be safe.
Yeah.
And where you would expect to be cared for. There is a parallel, but not it's not the same as domestic or physical abuse in a marriage, or abuse of children. That there's something even worse about that, because it's the place where you are supposed to be safe, particularly if you're a child in that context. So it's not the same as child abuse, but child abuse seems so worse because the parents are supposed to care for them, or your husband or wife are supposed to care for you. So it seems all the more proportionately worse because of that. And that's the same in the church. So sure, it's bad when a boss is a bully, or it's bad when a politician is a bully of I don't know, other politicians or members of the public or whatever. But it's not that place of safety with an ongoing regular relationship that is sort of covenanted in that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's worse in a church context.
And probably maybe just a sense of, if it happens in the workplace, you just find a new job on one level, and it just doesn't get you. Well, I just didn't get with the boss, and you kind of just moved on. Within the life of the church, you can often get tagged as, oh, they're moving on because they're an awkward.
Yeah.
And and then a church leader will phone up the other church leader. Oh no, yeah, be careful of them. So in other words, the abuse kind of then gets multiplied outwards, because actually the leader still has this sense of that's why it can carry on and feel even worse in a church, because you can't quite escape it.
And there might not necessarily be another Bible teaching church.
There may not be another Bible teaching church. You don't know what to do with it. You question your own spiritual life, because in the workplace it becomes obvious this is bullying. I'm employed to do this. In the church, well, they're the shepherds there to care for me. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe I'm not. Maybe my spiritual life's not good enough. Maybe it raises doubt. It's very. There's a similarity. You see it. Domestic violence in marriages where it's physical is much more obvious, but the emotional abuse, which is much more subtle, just undermines an individual in such a way that they're often left questioning themselves for years. What did I do? Did I do it? Was it me? Was it how I said it? Was it how I behaved? Was it same with violence, to be fair? That sense of, it makes that person feel less than, powerless, weak, and questioning. And when that happens in that kind of church environment, it's am I supposed to have done this? It's different. If you're in the workplace, well, maybe I'm not very good at my job, and you go somewhere else and you say, well, actually, I am good at my job. That was the culture.
Yeah,
it feels different in a church.
Yeah. So it's not. You've touched on this already. That it's not just big, high-profile churches where this kind of thing happens. it can, in any church it can happen. So is there anything we can do in our churches, just as ordinary Christians, to try and avoid this kind of situation?
I think a lot of it is cultural, not as in the wider culture, but the church culture, in that if you promote a culture where leaders are open to question, and even though you might disagree with them and they still might go ahead with stuff that you're not happy with, you've had open dialogue, and that any decision, apart from something very private and personal to do with somebody that they can't tell you, but basically any decision is open to question and is transparent in how it was made and who was involved and so on, and a willingness to genuinely listen to critique. Those are more cultural than necessarily procedural. You can have procedures about how you make decisions or whatever, but they're much more to do with culture. Is to do with, do I expect my leader to listen to me if I raise a question about that new appointment they've made or that new ministry that started or was stopped or whatever? Will they at least listen to me, and will they explain how they made the decision and who was involved, and will they be willing to change if they see that it's wrong? Or will they say, you shouldn't question me? So that those are cultural rather than procedural. There are some procedure things that can follow on, but they're more to do with investigation. I think where it's at, particularly for us at this point, is as a church and lots of other churches like us, is to look at our culture. Is it a biblical culture where we as a whole congregation are loving and serving one another, being appropriately open with one another and open to question, respecting and honouring our leaders, but our leaders laying down their lives for us, and like Paul in his letters, being willing to explain themselves and to say, I this is why I did that. This is why I delayed coming to you guys in Rome. This is my explanation. I'm not hiding it. I'm not just saying I'm an apostle. Just listen to me. He carefully explains, at the same time saying I'm an apostle and I have the authority of Christ, but he also explains his actions, which is really interesting. So yeah, that's some of the things. Go on.
But it's interesting. But it is harder for a member to do that. It's the leadership having to slightly shape that out.
Yeah.
If you're in a culture where you're exposed to and you think actually this isn't right, then I think you've got to find ways of where you can blowing the whistle, and however you do that.
Can I just add as well, as a woman, I think it's especially hard to do that in. Not even a spiritual abuse or anything even related to that, but anything that you've got questions about as a woman, it's quite hard within conservative evangelicalism to feel like you can come with any kind of concern or question, or because you don't want to be seen as taking a leadership role that, or questioning the authority of it, all of that, which we've discussed in previous ones. But I think this kind of culture helps with that kind of thing as well.
You've got to provide pathways as well, though, because for, say, a woman, or just say someone who's just a bit shy and wouldn't speak up in a whole church meeting, for example, to provide pathways to say, if it's something contentious, let's get the community groups talking about it a bit and the leaders hearing of it, but also the leaders having their ear to the ground and encouraging people to speak up and saying, what do you think? So although as a woman or as somebody else, you might say, I'm not going to mount a campaign against this thing that's happened, or I'm not going to raise the question about the behaviour of an elder as a sole campaign. But if someone actually came up to ask me, how do you think the leadership's doing, then I'd be willing to say. So yeah, some of it is, as Mark said, can be promoted by us. I'm not sure we always do that perfectly at Christchurch, the asking bit. I think we are open to question, but yeah, there's always stuff we can improve. And
we're trying, all the time. I think, just recently we've brought in what we call, 360 reviews. So Graham and I, in our last annual review, it involved all the elders feeding back on us, but it also went out wider to our community groups, which we lead, for any of their input, feedback on areas. And it also went out to the staff team that we lead. So, in other words, we're inviting comment. And it may be that people still don't comment because they feel they can't. They had the freedom to do it anonymously if they wanted. But it was an opportunity. We're trying to signal that we want to hear what you have to say, because we want a culture where it's open, where it's healthy. It's part of why we, even last year we had a very open church meeting where again we invited just comment on any area in the life of the church, and try to give as many channels for that to come back through community groups, through one-to-ones, through discussion, because we want to signal you want to be open. We don't want the kind of unhealthiness that comes from, cloak and dagger and secretiveness and secret votes, but much more kind of, we're a family. Families talk, so let's talk. Let's learn to speak truth in love and what that really looks like. Thinking about how we speak to one another.
Yeah. I thought I was cutting someone off then. It was about to speak.
I was pondering on saying that we also did something else in terms of if a church member really can't seem to make any headway raising an issue, we've got an arrangement with some other local churches that they can raise it with that church, and that church doesn't have to give a ruling like they're right, they're wrong, but they can advocate for them and sort of bring their case. So we're trying by little procedural things, but a lot of it is to do with what do you give off if anyone ever questions you, and it's to do with patterns and how you build up a sort of a reputation. Being dismissive or maybe a little bit sharp with someone once or twice is quite different to saying every time I ever raise anything. So it's kind of thinking, okay, I might have made a mistake here, I need to apologise. It's not about saying the words I'm open to question, but actually signalling that by the time and attention you might give to somebody who raises something. They still might feel not listened to, but if in good conscience you think, I really did listen to them, I really understood what they were saying, I really tried to explain, that's quite different from saying, oh, it's just them again, we won't bother.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of ignore it.
Yeah.
It's worth just adding on that, a slightly different tangent. We talked a lot about how the leadership speak, but actually what on the rise as well massively is abuse of pastors.
Yeah.
And abuse of church leaders.
Actually. Yeah.
And how they're being treated and spoken to, which part of me, it was just a vicious cycle in that, I think one of the things that I'm grateful for us at Christchurch is we have a plurality of leaders, and also Graham and I, there's two of us, which means things feel less intense or less aimed at us directly.
Yeah.
So if there's criticism of how the church is run, it doesn't suddenly feel like, oh, it's just me and that's coming at me. It feels like, oh, it's coming at us as an eldership. There's a team. We're in this together. Now that can have other effects. You can have, can all lock down together and become quite hard. But it does mean that it doesn't feel so personal. And I think that means that it allows you then just to keep being open, because it doesn't feel like it's just coming at me, but it feels like, okay, we're having a conversation about us as an eldership. We're in this together. We share the pain. We share the joys in that sense. And I think that does have a psychological impact effect, just how you therefore then speak into and take feedback, as it were.
Yeah. So how can then the ordinary Christians help to support our leaders, but also hold them to account? What are good ways that we can be doing this, whether we've got a church with like a number of pastors or elders, or whether we're in a smaller single pastor church? What are ways we can help them in this, both the supporting and the accountability thing?
It'd be great to pray for us, to pray that we be faithful. It's great to just keep talking to us as leaders, talking to your leaders, talking to your pastor, in a way that's not binary, in the sense of either I've got to win this argument and they basically need to go, or they're going to win and they're going to stay. But gentle critique, the faithful wounds of a friend. So I know for all the reasons you said, Katie, it is sometimes hard, but for the ordinary Christian, being open with their leaders, but also willing to listen to their leaders when they kind of explain, treating them as brothers and sisters, not as bosses, not as
or employees. I guess it could go both ways.
Quite, not treating church members as employees, but
or treating the pastor as your employee.
Well, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that sometimes happens. Sometimes there are little throwaway comments people make where they might say, we're paying for you or something.
Yeah, quite.
Which everything means something. So they may say it lightheartedly, but it's a kind of feeling like, you're here to serve us, and it's absolutely right that we are there to serve them.
Yeah.
But it's probably not helpful normally to make that point in the sort of context it's often made. But yeah, ordinary Christians praying for us and caring for us is good.
But I think I know what you mean when you say hold account. But I think we want to be careful what we mean by that, because I think what that can easily slip into, it can mean my job as a church member is to kind of sit over the eldership as if I have that authority to govern their decisions and their results. And the scriptures are clear, aren't they? You know, the scriptures are clear that elders are put in place to lead the churches. So they are to lead, and they're to do that lovingly, wisely, thoughtfully. So I think the position of the church member is not to assume. So I think if I disagree, is not to suddenly go, the elders have got this wrong, and I'm so sure I've got this right. I think that humility that just comes along just says, can you help me understand why you've gone this way? What were you thinking? What are the other factors? Because probably 99% of the time, there will be stuff that the elders are aware of that you're not aware of. Yeah. You know, that will be informing the decision or helping them to make. One of the joys of polarity is that you've got 7 or 8 guys who are feeding into that and getting input from various feeding in. That then helps to shape the decision. And the truth is, elders make very few decisions that are kind of so big that impact. A lot of the stuff is done upward through leadership groups, and you're kind of helping to set the tone. But where members start to think that their job is to hold the eldership responsible and account, you're setting yourselves up immediately for a really unhelpful clash. But that's not to say that membership shouldn't be asking questions, absolutely, as we talked about. But there must, because I think it honours the Lord, because he's put shepherds in place, and especially if they're trying to do that well, they're good shepherds, they're seeking to lovingly do. They may not get it right the whole time, look, none of us do. But if they do, give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, be generous in that. Just be gentle in how you ask the questions. Don't assume that you've seen everything rightly. You may have. And you may be bringing something really helpful that they've not been aware of, but don't assume. These little ways actually just help bring that culture of loving and caring for one another. You know, sometimes we think, well, our elders, they can just take it. You know, we forget that actually they're guys as well who feel, you know, and some of these guys are, they're volunteers. You know, they're investing hours and hours on top of busy jobs, busy family life as well. So just conscious of that honouring that the Lord speaks of in the scriptures of elderships, and how we do that goes a long way. You know, pastors have got to then be careful not to take advantage of that as well. Yeah.
So how can we talk about these kind of big leaders' failings, the kind that make it all over the news, but certainly all over Twitter? How do we have these conversations with those who are becoming disillusioned with the church? So maybe non-Christians who are looking on and saying things like, you can't trust the church, look at what so-and-so did. Or maybe a Christian who's starting to drift, starting to think, I don't know if I want to be part of the church because look what X, Y, and Z pastors have done. What's a helpful way to have those conversations?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Some of it does get on the national news as well, by the way, national newspapers anyway.
Yeah, I imagine some
secular, not just in the Christian press. I think it's good to remember that we're not at all in denial about there being problems, but it is pretty exceptional. There are a lot of very low-profile, average pastors like us who, thankfully under God, are not under the shadow of some kind of abuse accusation at this point. There are lots and lots of them, and lots of guys who do finish well, you know, and retire from churches, and there's not some great legacy of resentment there. You know, I know lots of guys who've moved on. You know, new people gone in their place, and you know, there's change, but there's not like, oh, this is terrible. You know, what this guy must have been so terrible. So that I think encouraging people that it's exceptional. Of course, encouraging people that that there's the reality of sin. And you won't get very far in the Christian life if you don't accept that people will sin and people will fail you, and it's only Christ who will not let you down, and he is the only perfect shepherd and leader. But he calls you to be part of a church family, and that's how he will primarily minister to you. And sometimes because of our failings, that will break down, but you just need to get up and start again. And Christ won't let you down in the end if you're seeking to be faithful to him. I suppose I'd say things like that. probably Mark can think of some other ideas. I don't know.
I agree. I would just don't excuse it. We don't want to excuse it and say, oh, no, it's wrong.
Yeah.
That was wrong. It's sinful. It's wicked. Jesus hates it.
Yeah.
And God will hold that pastor to account for that. Yeah.
And others have been held, and we don't excuse that. And, we make it clear that we don't. And I think, in that sense of then just, I think then just exploring, often as well. I mean, let's be honest. Often people particularly non-believers, use that as a kind of reason to kind of duck the whole, where they actually stand before Jesus. It's just another reason to avoid. So I think we want to gently explore what's really the issue. And it may be the reason is because actually they have an abusive past. They were brought up in an abusive home, or they're fleeing an abusive. So we want to be sensitive to that, recognizing that there may be bigger things going on here than just trying to, either kind of come up for another reason to deny Christianity. There may actually be real reasons, and kind of just helping people to understand what's actually should be going on in the life of church, helping people see the kind of practices and structures that we have put in place in order to flag that, so that people feel safe. That's the key. We want people to come, feel safe, to hear the good news about Jesus. Yeah,
great. That's, I think, a good note to end on. Unless either of you got... What's that thing you were holding in your head, Graham? Did it make it out of your mouth?
Yeah, I think it made it out.
Lovely.
Out in one of the discussions. So yeah, no, it's all good. And if anybody has any issues with our church leadership, we are open to question, but also gently and carefully. If you're listening to this and there are things you'd like to talk to your own church leaders about, respectfully do that. And raise it in love, not in order to win, but it will help. And church leaders who might be listening to this, be open to question. That's not a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you even have to change course necessarily, but it does mean that you're being honouring to Christ and the body of Christ as you do that.
Great. We'll be back next time. Next episode will be the last one of the month, I believe. So we'll be on an attribute of God, which will be fun. I always miss those when
with a special guest.
We'll have a special guest. Should we leave it as a surprise?
A surprise.
Yeah.
A surprise.
I won't be here though. So that
spoiler:
the
special guest is not Mark.
Yeah. So there you go.
There we go. It'd been several episodes in a row otherwise, where we would have had all three of us. So we have to mix it up a bit.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Cool. We will see you next time. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod. That's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.